I'm Sarah Mitchell, 32 years old, and until last year I thought I understood family loyalty. When my grandfather Walter passed away, leaving me his Vermont property, I never expected my parents to demand I sign it over to my brother Marcus. Our family dynamics were always strange, but manageable until I refused their ultimatum. Nothing prepared me for walking into my Chicago apartment that day to find everything destroyed, especially the handcrafted memory box my grandfather made me. If you're watching this, I'd love to know where you're from. Please hit subscribe and let me know in the comments if you've ever had to choose between family expectations and your own boundaries. My grandfather Walter was the steady presence throughout my childhood that my parents never managed to be. Some of my earliest memories are of sitting beside him on the dock of his Vermont lake house, my little legs dangling over the edge while he patiently taught me how to bait a hook. "Fishing isn't about catching fish, Sarah," he'd say with that gentle smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. "It's about learning patience." Patience was something my parents, Diana and Richard Mitchell, never quite mastered. They were always rushing from one social commitment to another, climbing the corporate ladder, or managing Marcus' packed schedule of sports and activities. My brother was 4 years younger, but quickly became the family's golden child. Charming, athletic, and effortlessly popular. When Marcus entered a local baseball tournament, my parents rearranged vacations to attend. When I won the state art competition in 8th grade, my mother simply said, "That's nice, dear," while checking her email. Grandpa Walter noticed, though. He drove 3 hours to attend that art show, proudly standing beside my watercolor landscape of his Vermont property. "You captured the soul of the place," he whispered, squeezing my shoulder while my parents mingled with other parents, talking about Marcus' upcoming championship game. Our bond grew stronger in his workshop, where he taught me woodworking during summer visits. The smell of cedar and pine still brings me back to those days, watching his weathered hands guide mine on the lathe or sander. "Slow down and feel the grain," he'd instruct. "Wood has its own story, and our job is to help tell it." By 16, I'd helped him build bookshelves, birdhouses, and even the beautiful jewelry box that became my high school graduation gift. Those teenage years were particularly difficult at home. My mother, Diana, a marketing executive with a perfectionist streak, constantly critiqued everything from my posture to my choice in friends. My father, Richard, an investment banker, was physically present but emotionally absent, retreating behind his newspaper or later, his iPad, whenever family tensions rose. Meanwhile, Marcus could do no wrong. His messy room was just boyish charm. His mediocre grades were because he's focused on athletics, and his occasional rebellious behavior was just testing boundaries. "They don't see you," Grandpa told me one summer evening when I broke down crying on his porch. "But I do, Sarah. I see your kindness, your creativity, your thoughtfulness. Sometimes people are so busy looking for what they expect that they miss what's actually there." When I left for Northwestern University in Chicago, those words sustained me. While my parents paid for my education, something I'm still grateful for, their financial support came with constant reminders about practical career choices and disapproval of my graphic design major. During those college years, my monthly calls with Grandpa Walter became my emotional anchor. He'd listen to my dreams, my struggles, my small victories, asking questions that showed he was truly paying attention. After graduation, I landed a job at a mid-sized design agency in Chicago. My parents attended my graduation but left early to catch Marcus a college baseball game. "Your brother might get scouted today," my mother explained as they hugged me goodbye. Grandpa Walter stayed, taking me to dinner and presenting me with a hand-carved wooden pen set. "For signing all those big design contracts," he'd said with a wink. As I built my career in Chicago over the next decade, my visits to Vermont became sacred retreats. Every few months, I'd make the trip east, helping Grandpa with projects around the property, listening to his stories about his days as a civil engineer, or simply sitting in comfortable silence on the porch swing, watching the sunset over the lake. During those weekends, my phone stayed mostly off. My parents rarely noticed my absence, busy with their own lives and Marcus' constantly evolving business ventures that never quite seemed to succeed despite their generous investments. 2 years ago, Grandpa's health began to decline. What started as just a little shortness of breath progressed to congestive heart failure. When his doctor recommended in-home care, I didn't hesitate. I negotiated an unpaid leave from my job and temporarily relocated to Vermont. Those final months were precious beyond measure. Difficult, yes, as I watched his strength fade, but filled with deeper conversations and quiet moments that I'll treasure forever. My parents visited occasionally, bringing casseroles and spending an obligatory hour or two before heading back to their busy lives in Boston. Marcus came twice, once for an afternoon, the second time for barely an hour, constantly checking his phone for messages about his latest business scheme, some kind of tech startup that needed his immediate attention. Don't judge them too harshly, Grandpa told me one evening as I angrily washed dishes after Marcus's brief visit. Some people don't know how to face mortality. You're stronger than you realize, Sarah. When Grandpa Walter passed peacefully in his sleep with me holding his hand, I felt a grief so profound it seemed to physically alter me. But beneath the sorrow was a strange sense of completion. We'd said everything that needed saying, shared everything that needed sharing. I'd been there, fully present, right until the end. I never expected that fulfilling this final act of love would soon cost me the rest of my family. The funeral was held at the small chapel in town where Grandpa had attended services for over 40 years. Despite his wide circle of friends and former colleagues, we kept the gathering intimate as per his wishes. I'd spent the previous week making arrangements, selecting readings, and choosing photographs for the memorial display. My parents arrived the night before, staying at a nearby hotel rather than at the house where I'd been living for months. Marcus arrived 15 minutes after the service began, sliding into the pew beside our parents with a subtly apologetic wave. A petite blonde woman I'd never seen before followed him. Later during the reception, he introduced her as Natalie, his girlfriend of 3 months. She seemed nice enough, offering condolences with what appeared to be genuine sympathy, despite never having met my grandfather. My mother moved through the reception with practiced grace, accepting condolences with a delicate handkerchief pressed occasionally to dry eyes. My father stood stoically beside her, shaking hands and nodding gravely. Their grief seemed performed rather than lived, a stark contrast to the raw ache I carried in my chest. Your grandfather would be proud of the service you arranged, Frank Miller, Grandpa's neighbor of 20 years, told me as we shared coffee in the church basement afterward. Walter always said you were the one who truly understood him. After the last guest departed, Lawrence Bradley, Grandpa's attorney of many years, asked us to gather at the house for the reading of the will. I watched my mother straighten her black dress and exchange a meaningful glance with my father as we all drove separately to the property. In Grandpa's wood-paneled study, with afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows, Lawrence opened his briefcase and removed a folder. Walter was very clear about his wishes, he began, adjusting his glasses.
He updated his will 6 months
ago and reviewed it again just weeks before his passing to ensure it reflected his exact intentions. The room fell silent as Lawrence began to read. The shock came not from the contents themselves. I'd known Grandpa intended to leave me something, but from the specific allocations. The Vermont property, including the main house, guest cottage, and 5 acres of lakefront land, was bequeathed to me. Additionally, his collection of meticulously restored vintage cars, 4 classics he'd lovingly maintained, were mine as well. To Marcus, Grandpa left his investment portfolio and savings accounts totaling approximately $300,000. My parents received several family heirlooms, including antique furniture, my grandmother's jewelry collection, and a small monetary gift. I stared at my hands as Lawrence finished reading, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Gratitude collided with grief, all wrapped in disbelief that Grandpa had trusted me with the place he loved most in the world. Well, my mother said after a moment of loaded silence, her voice brittle but controlled. Congratulations, Sarah, quite the windfall for you. Mom, I started, but Lawrence interjected. If I may, he said. Walter was explicit about his reasoning. The distribution reflects both his relationships and his assessment of what would benefit each of you most appropriately. My father nodded. Stiffly. Of course, Walter always had his reasons. Marcus's expression was difficult to read. Something between surprise and calculation flickered across his features before he managed a tight smile. Good for you, sis. Didn't realize you and Grandpa were so tight. The tension was palpable as Lawrence packed up his documents, promising to send formal paperwork within the week. He gave me a supportive pat on the shoulder before leaving, as if he anticipated what might come. Dinner that evening was excruciating. We ordered pizza since none of us felt like cooking and sat around the kitchen table where I'd shared countless meals with Grandpa during his final months. The property must be worth at least $1 million in today's market, my father commented, trying to sound casual. Lakefront in this area has skyrocketed. Richard, my mother chided softly, though her eyes showed agreement. I'm just saying it's quite the responsibility for someone with no experience in property management, he continued. And those vintage cars require specialized maintenance. I took a slow sip of water. I helped Grandpa with the property for years, and I've learned a lot about the cars from him and his mechanic Tom. Still, my mother interjected, it's a lot for someone living in Chicago with a full-time job. Marcus has been looking at investment properties for his business incubator concept. Perhaps there's a way to make this work for everyone. Marcus leaned forward, suddenly animated. Actually, this location would be perfect for what I'm planning. We could convert the main house into co-working spaces, maybe add some modern cabins for tech retreats. The potential is huge. I felt a chill run through me. This place was Grandpa's home for 50 years. He didn't want it turned into a business compound. How would you know what he wanted? My mother asked sharply. Because we talked about it many times. I pushed my plate away, appetite gone. He loved that this place has history and character. He wanted it preserved. The conversation deteriorated. From there, with passive-aggressive comments about me getting lucky and how some people always seem to land on their feet. By the time they left for their hotel, promising to continue the discussion tomorrow, I was emotionally drained. Alone in the house that night, I wandered from room to room, touching familiar surfaces and feeling Grandpa's presence in every corner. In his bedroom, I opened the antique secretary desk where he kept important papers and found an envelope with my name written in his distinctive handwriting. With trembling fingers, I broke the seal and unfolded several pages of his elegant script. My dearest Sarah, it began, if you're reading this, I've moved on to whatever comes next, and you're facing the aftermath of my decisions regarding the estate. I want you to understand why I've chosen as I have. Tears blurred my vision as I read his explanation, how he'd observed all of us over the years, noting who valued things and who valued connection. How he'd seen my genuine love for the property itself, not just its monetary worth. How he trusted me to be a good steward of his legacy. Marcus will be fine with the financial assets, he wrote. Money is what he understands and values. But you, Sarah, you understand that a home is more than walls and land, it's memories and peace and continuity. I give you this place not because I loved you more, but because you loved it as I did. Honor that love, however feels right to you, with no guilt and no obligation to anyone else's expectations. I fell asleep in his armchair that night, the letter clutched to my chest, his words strengthening my resolve to honor his wishes exactly as he'd intended. 2 weeks after the funeral, I returned to Chicago to organize my affairs. My apartment felt strange after months in Vermont, smaller, less substantial somehow. My boss, Michael, had been understanding about my bereavement leave, but was clearly relieved to have me back. I threw myself into pending projects, trying to establish a new normal while processing both grief and unexpected responsibility. The first call from my mother came 3 days after my return. Sarah, honey, have you had time to think about what we discussed? Her voice held that familiar tone of controlled expectation that had defined my childhood. Mom, there's nothing to discuss. Grandpa left the property to me because he wanted me to have it. Families need to support each other, she replied. Marcus has a real opportunity with this business concept, and he needs a location. You have your career in Chicago. It just makes sense to let him utilize the property. It's not about what makes practical sense. It's about respecting Grandpa's wishes. Your grandfather wasn't thinking clearly toward the end, she said, her voice hardening. You were there, influencing him when he was vulnerable. The accusation stung like a physical slap. That's not fair. I was there taking care of him. Because he needed someone. We all have different ways of showing love, she countered. Just think about doing the right thing for your brother. He's always supported you. That was her first call, but far from the last. Over the next 3 weeks, the pressure mounted steadily. My father took a different approach in his calls, appealing to financial logic. The property taxes alone will eat into your savings, he warned, not to mention maintenance costs for a house. That age, if you sign it over to Marcus's business, you could retain partial ownership without the burden. I stood firm, explaining that I was exploring options, including possibly relocating to Vermont permanently. This only intensified their campaign. Then Marcus began calling directly. His initial approaches were friendly, almost conspiratorial. Come on, sis, we could work something out that benefits both of us, he cajoled. You could have access anytime you want. I'd even reserve the guest house for you. When that didn't work, his tone changed. You're being selfish, Sarah. I have investors ready to commit once I secure the location. This is my big break, and you're blocking it out of some sentimental attachment. By the 4th week, the calls were coming daily, sometimes from all 3 of them in rotation. My mother had begun reaching out to extended family members who then contacted me with concerns about family harmony. At work, my performance began to suffer. Karen, the creative director who had mentored me for years, noticed my distraction during a client presentation. What's going on with you? She asked afterward, closing her office door for privacy. You're not yourself lately. I found myself unexpectedly pouring out the whole situation. Karen listened attentively, her expression darkening as I described the escalating pressure. Sarah, this is a clear boundary issue, she said finally. Your grandfather made his wishes known. Legally, you don't owe anyone an explanation for honoring them. Her support strengthened me, but the respite was short-lived. That weekend, an unexpected knock at my apartment door revealed my parents standing in the hallway, their expressions determined. We thought this conversation needed to happen in person, my father said as they entered without waiting for an invitation. What followed was 2 hours of the most intense emotional manipulation I'd ever experienced. They paced my small living room, listing all the sacrifices they'd made for me throughout my childhood, dance lessons I'd begged to quit, the expensive art supplies they'd purchased, the college education they'd funded. After everything we've done for you, my mother said, tears strategically welling, this is how you repay us. By standing in the way of your brother's success? This isn't about Marcus' success, I countered. It's about respecting Grandpa's wishes. He didn't want the property developed. You filled his head with that nonsense when he was too weak to think clearly, my father accused. You saw an opportunity and took advantage. That's not true. I was there because I loved him. Where were you both? Where was Marcus? We all show love differently, my mother repeated her earlier refrain. We had responsibilities we couldn't abandon on a whim. Taking care of Grandpa wasn't a whim. The point is, my father interjected, family supports family. Your brother needs this opportunity, and you're in a position to help him. By giving away what Grandpa explicitly wanted me to have, by thinking about what family really means, my mother said, her voice cold despite the tears still clinging to her lashes. You need to decide what's more important, a house or your place in this family. They left with that ultimatum hanging in the air, my mother's parting words particularly ominous. Think carefully about what you're doing, Sarah. Some decisions can't be undone. After they left, I sat shaking on my couch, doubts creeping in despite my resolve. Was I being selfish? Was family harmony worth more than adhering to Grandpa's wishes? I called my best friend, Melissa, who had known my family dynamics for years. They're manipulating you, she said flatly after I recounted the visit. Your grandfather made his choice for a reason. He saw something in you that he trusted. But what if this ruins my relationship with my family forever? Honey, they're the ones making that threat, not you. That's not love, it's control. The conversation with Melissa helped, but I still felt torn. That night, I booked a flight to Vermont for the upcoming weekend. I needed to reconnect with the property to feel Grandpa's presence and clarity again. Little did I know that this trip would force the conflict to its breaking point. Friday evening, I pulled into the long gravel driveway of Grandpa's now my Vermont property, exhausted from the flight and subsequent drive from Burlington. The sight of another car parked near the house sent a jolt of alarm through me. I recognized Marcus' silver Audi immediately. Stepping into my own home felt like walking into an ambush. Marcus and Natalie were in the living room, measuring tape stretched across the space between walls. A notebook lay open on Grandpa's antique coffee table, filled with scribbled dimensions and notes. "What are you doing here?" I demanded, dropping my weekend bag on the floor. "How did you even get in?" Marcus barely looked startled. "Hey, sis. Just getting some preliminary measurements for the renovation plans." "Renovation plans? This is my house, Marcus. You can't just let yourself in and start planning renovations." Natalie at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. "I told you we should have called first," she murmured to Marcus. "Mom and Dad gave us their copy of the key," Marcus explained, ignoring her comment. "We figured since you were coming this weekend anyway, it would be a good time to show you the concept boards. Natalie has a great vision for transforming this place into a modern retreat center." The casual entitlement in his tone left me speechless for a moment while I struggled to form words. Natalie awkwardly rolled up a large design board that had been spread on the dining room table. "These old cabins have so much potential," she offered, clearly trying to diffuse the tension. "We could preserve the rustic charm while updating the functionality." "There's nothing to update," I finally managed. "This isn't happening. I'm not selling or converting this property." Marcus' friendly facade dropped instantly. "Don't be difficult, Sarah. This isn't just about you. I've already mentioned the location to potential investors. That's not my problem. You had no right to promise something that isn't yours." "It should be mine," he snapped, color rising in his face. "What are you going to do with this place?" "Visit twice a year while it sits empty." "I have actual plans, a vision that could make us all money." "This isn't about money. It's about respecting Grandpa's wishes. Grandpa didn't understand modern business opportunities. He was stuck in the past, just like you." I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "I think you both need to leave now." "You're making a huge mistake," Marcus said, gathering his papers with jerky movements. "I've got everything riding on this venture, Sarah. The investors I lined up for my last project are getting impatient for returns." That's when the truth clicked into place. "You're in financial trouble, aren't you? That's what this is really about." His silence confirmed my suspicion. "How bad is it?" I pressed. "Bad enough," he finally admitted. "The tech startup tanked. I leveraged too much on projected returns. If I don't come up with something solid soon, I'm looking at bankruptcy." "So your solution is to take what Grandpa left me and liquidate it for your bailout?" "It's not like that," he protested, but his eyes shifted away from mine. "The retreat center concept is legitimate. It could work. And if it doesn't, you sell to developers and walk away with cash while Grandpa's legacy gets bulldozed?" Natalie fidgeted with her purse strap. "Marcus, maybe we should go. This isn't going well." "You need to leave," I repeated, moving to hold the front door open. "And give me that key." After a tense standoff, Marcus reluctantly handed over the key and stormed out with Natalie trailing behind. "This isn't over?" he called over his shoulder. "You've always been selfish, Sarah. Always thinking you're better than the rest of us. Because Grandpa favored you." I locked the door behind them, then sank onto the entryway bench, shaking with adrenaline and anger. The violation of having them in my space, measuring and planning as if my ownership was merely a temporary inconvenience, left me feeling physically ill. First thing Saturday morning, I called a local locksmith who came and changed every lock on the property. The expense was considerable for same-day service, but the security was worth every penny. Throughout the day, my phone buzzed constantly, with messages not just from my immediate family but from aunts, uncles, and cousins I rarely heard from. It seemed my mother had been busy spreading her version of events through the family grapevine. "Sarah, is it true you're refusing to help your brother despite his financial difficulties?" texted my Aunt Linda. "Your mother is heartbroken over this family rift, but can't you find a compromise?" wrote my uncle. The most disturbing discovery came when my cousin, Amy, accidentally included me in a reply to a family group chat I hadn't known existed. Scrolling through the previous messages, I found my mother painting a picture of me as mentally unstable, suggesting that grief had affected my judgment and that I needed family intervention before I made irrevocable mistakes. "She's not herself," my mother had written. "The stress of caring for Dad and then inheriting everything has clearly unbalanced her. She's always been emotionally fragile." The character assassination was breathtaking in its calculated cruelty. This woman, who had rarely shown interest in my emotional well-being, was now using my supposed mental health as a weapon against me. I shut off my phone for the remainder of the weekend, focusing instead on connecting with the property. I walked the wooded paths Grandpa and I had traversed countless times, sat on the dock where we'd fished together, and spent hours in his workshop, running my fingers over the tools he taught me to use. In each space, I felt his presence and his approval. By Sunday evening, I felt stronger in my resolve but dreaded returning to Chicago and the pressure that awaited me there. The stress had begun taking a physical toll: headaches, insomnia, and a constant knot of anxiety in my stomach. Back at work Monday, I struggled to focus during an important client presentation. Midway through showing concept boards for a major campaign, the room began to spin. My voice faltered, and I felt a crushing pressure in my chest. Karen quickly took over as I excused myself, barely making it to the bathroom before collapsing in a full-blown panic attack. "This can't continue," Karen said afterward, sitting beside me in a small break room where I sipped water with still shaking hands. "You're burning out, Sarah." "I don't know what to do," I admitted. "They won't stop. Every day it's more calls, more guilt, more manipulation. Take some time," she advised. "You have vacation days accumulated, plus you could work remotely. For a while, get some distance from this situation." The suggestion crystallized something I'd been considering since the weekend. "I could stay in Vermont," I said slowly. "The house is just sitting empty, and there's reliable internet for remote work." Karen nodded encouragingly. "It might be exactly what you need. Some space to think without constant pressure." That evening, I requested a temporary remote work arrangement, promising to come back for essential meetings. Karen approved it immediately, concerned about my well-being. I booked a flight for the following weekend, planning to pack enough for an extended stay. The decision brought immediate relief. Vermont represented safety, connection to Grandpa, and distance from the emotional warfare my family had been waging. I spent the week organizing projects that could be handled remotely and packing essentials. I didn't tell my family about my plans, but they must have sensed something shifting in my resolve. The calls intensified, with my mother leaving tearful voicemails about family loyalty and my father sending lengthy emails, outlining rational arguments for transferring the property to Marcus's business venture. By Friday, I was more than ready to escape to Vermont. Arriving at the property that evening felt like taking my first full breath in weeks. I spent the weekend settling in, setting up a workspace in the sunroom that overlooked the lake, and beginning to truly inhabit the space as my own. The first week passed peacefully. I fell into a rhythm of work during the day and property maintenance in the evenings. I discovered I enjoyed mowing the expansive lawn, trimming back the garden paths, and making small repairs that Grandpa had taught me to handle. The physical labor was therapeutic after days at the computer. I met the neighbors properly, Frank and Dorothy Johnson, a retired couple who had known Grandpa for decades. They invited me for dinner, sharing stories about my grandfather I'd never heard and offering their help whenever I needed it. "Walter talked about you constantly," Dorothy told me over homemade apple pie. "He was so proud of the woman you've become." Their warmth and acceptance began to heal something in me that had been damaged by my family's rejection. I started to envision a future here, perhaps keeping my job remotely permanently, or even exploring design opportunities in Burlington. Just as I was beginning to feel settled, the fragile peace shattered. I returned from grocery shopping on my second Friday in Vermont to find my mother standing on the front porch beside a large moving truck. "What is this?" I demanded, leaving grocery bags in my car as I approached. "I'm here to collect some family heirlooms," she announced with brittle determination. "Things that should rightfully go to all of us, not just you." The will was very specific about what belongs to whom, I countered, blocking her path to the door. "You received the family heirlooms Grandpa wanted you to have. There are items in this house that go back generations," she insisted. "Your grandfather wasn't thinking clearly when he made these arrangements. You can't just show up with a moving truck and take things, Mom. That's not how this works." "I'm your mother," she said, as if that single fact trumped all legal and ethical considerations. "I've authorized the movers to begin packing certain items. We'll be in and out within a few hours." I noticed then that she held a piece of paper, a list presumably of items she intended to take. The audacity was staggering. "You're not coming in," I stated firmly. "This is my property and you're trespassing." Her face contorted with an emotion I couldn't quite name, something between rage and disbelief that her authority was being challenged. "You ungrateful child," she hissed, her mask of maternal concern dropping completely. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay your family." "Grandpa is my family too," I replied, standing my ground. "And I'm honoring his wishes." "You'll regret this decision," she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "When you find yourself alone, remember this was your choice." She signaled to the moving truck driver, who nodded and began to pull away. As she walked to her own car, she turned back with a final parting shot. "You think you've won, Sarah, but this isn't over." "Not by a long shot." The threat in her voice sent a chill through me despite the warm spring air. As I watched her car disappear down the driveway, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was right. This wasn't over. It was about to get much worse. The breaking point and a new path after my mother's dramatic departure, I threw myself into making the property truly mine. Each project felt like both therapy and affirmation, repainting the kitchen in a sunny yellow Grandpa had always talked about but never got around to, replacing the worn living room rug with a hand-woven one from a local artisan, planting new perennials along the front walkway. Frank and Dorothy Johnson became unexpected allies, stopping by with homemade bread or offering tools for various projects. Frank helped me fix a persistent leak in the guest cottage roof, refusing payment and instead accepting only dinner and conversation. "Your grandfather would be pleased to see you making this place your own," Dorothy remarked one evening as we shared iced tea on the porch. "He worried about you, you know. Thought you worked too hard in that city without enough people who really saw you." Her words touched something deep in me. For the first time since the inheritance drama began, I felt truly confident in my decision to keep the property. This wasn't just about honoring Grandpa's wishes anymore. It was about claiming the life I actually wanted, rather than the one my family had always pushed me toward. I even began exploring local job opportunities. A small design studio in Burlington had posted an opening that seemed perfect for my experience level. The owner, Jessica Fleming, was impressed with my portfolio during a preliminary phone interview and invited me for an in-person meeting the following week. "We focus on sustainable businesses and local artisans," she explained. "Your aesthetic would fit perfectly with our client base." For the first time in years, I felt a sense of possibility and direction that had nothing to do with my family's expectations. I could envision a whole new life here, meaningful work, a beautiful home with history and character, and perhaps even a community of people who valued me for myself. That growing sense of peace was shattered by a phone call from my downstairs neighbor in Chicago, Tina Rodriguez. "Sarah, I think something's wrong with your apartment," she said without preamble. "I heard a lot of noise earlier today, banging, crashing sounds. Now there's water seeping through my ceiling from your bathroom." "Water? That's impossible. Everything was fine when I left 2 weeks ago." "Well, something's definitely going on up there." The building manager tried knocking but got no answer. He's going to use the emergency key to check for pipe damage. Please tell him to go ahead, I said, anxiety building. And Tina, could you call me back once they've looked inside? The 90 minutes I waited for her return call were excruciating. When my phone finally rang, Tina's voice was hesitant, concerned. Sarah, you need to come back to Chicago right away. What's wrong? How bad is it? It's not a water leak, she said carefully. Your apartment. It looks like someone broke. I don't know how to say this, it looks like someone deliberately wrecked the place. I flew back to Chicago the next morning, taking the earliest available flight. The Uber ride from O'Hare to my apartment building felt endless as my mind cycled through worst-case scenarios. Nothing prepared me for what I found. The building manager, Carlos, met me in the lobby, his expression grave. Miss Mitchell, I've called the police. They're on their way to take a report. When he unlocked my door, I stepped into devastation. Every piece of furniture had been damaged. Sofa cushions slashed, dining chairs broken, bookshelves toppled. Picture frames lay shattered across the floor, and someone had poured what looked like red wine over my white area rug. In the kitchen, cabinet contents had been swept onto the floor, dishes broken, food containers emptied. But the true horror awaited in my bedroom. There, centered on my stripped mattress, lay the splintered remains of Grandpa's wooden memory box, the one he'd lovingly crafted for my 16th birthday. The intricate marquetry lid was smashed, the delicate compartments inside destroyed. Scattered among the wooden shards were the contents, photographs torn to pieces, the pressed flowers from Grandpa's garden crushed, the handwritten notes and cards he'd given me over the years ripped and crumpled. I fell to my knees beside the bed, carefully gathering the fragments with trembling hands. These irreplaceable mementos had been deliberately targeted and systematically destroyed. This wasn't a random burglary, nothing appeared to be stolen. This was a calculated act of emotional violence. The security camera in the hallway should have caught whoever did this, Carlos said from the doorway, his voice gentle with concern. The police arrived shortly after, taking photographs and notes while I sat numb on what remained of my living room chair. The responding officers were professionally sympathetic, but clearly saw this as a property crime rather than the personal violation it represented. Any idea who might have wanted to do this? One officer asked. I hesitated, the accusation sticking in my throat despite the evidence before me. I've been having a dispute with my family over an inheritance. My mother threatened that I would regret my decision not to give my grandfather's property to my brother. The officers exchanged glances. We'll need their contact information, and we'll check the security footage. Carlos brought his laptop to show us the hallway camera feed. The timestamp showed entry 2 days earlier at 11:42 a.m. There was no forced entry, just the clear image of my mother using a key to unlock my door. She was alone, carrying a large tote bag. The camera caught her exit 3 hours later, the bag seemingly empty, her expression eerily calm. That's my mother, I confirmed, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. Diana Mitchell. The officers took the video evidence and completed their report, promising to follow up. After they left, I checked into a nearby hotel, unable to face sleeping in the destroyed apartment. Sitting on the edge of the anonymous hotel bed, I finally allowed myself to break down completely, sobbing until physical exhaustion overcame emotional pain. The next morning I called Karen to request additional time off, briefly explaining the situation. Take whatever time you need, she said, horror evident in her voice. Do you have somewhere safe to stay? I'm at a hotel now. I'll probably go back to Vermont after I deal with the apartment. Sarah, this is serious. Your mother committed a crime. Have you considered a restraining order? The suggestion shocked me initially, but the more I thought about it, the more necessary it seemed. This had escalated beyond family disagreement into something dangerous. I spent the morning researching attorneys and found Rebecca Torres, who specialized in family law and restraining orders. She fit me into her schedule that afternoon, listening attentively as I recounted the entire situation from the inheritance to the destruction. This is a clear case of property destruction and harassment, she confirmed. We have solid grounds for both a restraining order and criminal charges for the damage to your apartment. She's my mother, I said weakly, still struggling with the reality of the situation. I understand this is difficult, Rebecca said gently. But her actions show a concerning pattern of escalation, first emotional manipulation, then boundary violations at the Vermont property, and now destruction of your personal possessions. What might come next if this behavior isn't addressed? With Rebecca's guidance, I filed for an emergency restraining order that afternoon. The judge granted a temporary order based on the police report and security footage, scheduling a hearing for the permanent order the following week. When the police contacted my mother for questioning, she denied everything despite the clear video evidence. According to the detective who called me, she claimed she had merely gone to my apartment to check on things since I'd been away and found it already destroyed. The lie was so blatant, so easily disproven by the security footage showing her entering with an empty bag and leaving hours later, that it revealed just how disconnected from reality she had become in her determination to punish me. My father began calling incessantly after my mother was formally charged with destruction of property. His voicemails oscillated between anger and bargaining. "How could you do this to your own mother?" he demanded in one message. "Filing charges against family? You've gone too far, Sarah. In the next, let's work this out between us. Drop the charges, sign over the Vermont property, and we can put this whole unfortunate situation behind us." The emotional whiplash was exhausting. "Marcus." Tu began texting, his messages more directly threatening. "You've ruined Mom's reputation with these false accusations. I'm consulting attorneys about suing you for manipulating Grandpa when he was sick. We have witnesses who will testify to your undue influence." Despite the continuing pressure, something had fundamentally shifted within me. Seeing the deliberate destruction of the memories I cherished most, especially the handcrafted box that represented Grandpa's love and understanding, had severed something vital. The last lingering doubts about my decision evaporated, replaced by a cold clarity. I hired a cleaning service to deal with the immediate mess in my apartment, arranged for necessary repairs, and packed what little remained undamaged. Within 3 days, I had terminated my lease, placed my salvaged belongings in storage, and booked a one-way flight back to Vermont. Resolution and a new legacy. The court date for the permanent restraining order arrived the following week. I flew back to Chicago specifically for the hearing, staying again at a hotel and meeting with Rebecca beforehand to prepare. Nothing could have prepared me for my mother's courtroom performance. She alternated between tearful pleas about her concern for my mental health and barely controlled anger at my betrayal. The judge watched impassively as she claimed I had always been difficult, always jealous of my brother, and manipulated my elderly father for personal gain. When presented with the security footage showing her entering and leaving my apartment during the exact time frame of the destruction, she claimed she had found it that way and had been too shocked to report it immediately. "Your Honor," Rebecca argued calmly, "the evidence clearly shows Miss Mitchell entered with an empty bag and left with a full one after spending 3 hours in the apartment. The timing and targeted nature of the destruction, particularly of irreplaceable mementos from the client's grandfather, demonstrate a deliberate intent to cause emotional harm." The judge agreed, granting the permanent restraining order prohibiting my mother from contacting me or coming within 500 feet of me, my residence, or my workplace for 2 years. Outside the courthouse, my father waited on the steps, his face flushed with anger. "You've gone too far," he said as I exited with Rebecca beside me. "As far as I'm concerned, you're no longer part of this family." The words should have devastated me. Instead, I felt an unexpected sense of liberation. "That's your choice, Dad," I said, my voice steady, "just like keeping Grandpa's property as mine." "Don't contact us again," he said, turning away. "You've made your decision." As I watched him walk to the parking lot where my mother waited in their car, I realized a chapter of my life had definitively closed. The family I had known, with its conditional love and manipulative dynamics, was gone. What remained to be seen was what I would build in its place. Returning to Vermont after the restraining order hearing felt like escaping to sanctuary. The weight of familial expectations had been brutally severed, leaving grief but also a strange, tentative freedom. For the first time in my adult life, I had no obligation to consider my parents' approval in my decisions. My first priority was securing my new home. I hired a local security company to install a comprehensive system, cameras, motion sensors, and upgraded locks. The technician seemed puzzled by my insistence on such thorough measures for a relatively low-crime area, but I couldn't shake the fear that my mother's vindictiveness might extend to this property as well. Better safe than sorry, I explained vaguely, not wanting to share the painful details with a stranger. With my physical safety addressed, I turned to practical matters. I contacted a real estate agent in Chicago to handle the sale of my apartment. Once repairs were complete, I officially accepted the position at Jessica's design studio in Burlington, giving notice to my Chicago firm. Karen was disappointed but understanding. "You need a fresh start," she acknowledged during our final video call. "But promise you'll stay in touch. You're not just a talented designer but a friend." Her support meant more than she could know, especially as the remainder of my family closed ranks against me. The criminal case against my mother proceeded. Despite my father's attempts to pressure me into dropping charges, she eventually accepted a plea deal, probation and mandatory counseling rather than jail time. I didn't object to the leniency. Punishment wasn't my goal, only protection and perhaps some accountability. As spring warmed into summer, I began to establish routines in my new home. Mornings started with coffee on the dock, watching the mist rise from the lake. I worked from home 2 days a week and commuted to Burlington for the other 3. Weekends were devoted to gradually making the property my own while preserving its essential character and Grandpa's influence. Frank and Dorothy Johnson became my surrogate family, inviting me for Sunday dinners and offering wisdom without judgment when I shared pieces of the family drama. Their steady presence helped anchor me during moments when grief threatened to overwhelm my determination. "Families are complicated," Dorothy observed one evening as we shelled peas on her porch. "Your grandfather understood that better than most." "What do you mean?" I asked, curious about this hint of history I didn't know. "Walter didn't talk about it much, but he had his own falling out with his father back in the day. Something about refusing to join the family manufacturing business and becoming an engineer instead." She smiled gently. "That's partly why he bought this place, to start fresh, create his own legacy." This revelation stunned me. Grandpa had never mentioned any estrangement from his own father. I wondered what other family history remained unknown to me, what patterns might be repeating across generations. My curiosity led me to explore the house more thoroughly, particularly the attic spaces I hadn't fully investigated. There, in a cedar chest tucked under the eaves, I discovered a collection of Grandpa's journals dating back to his 30s, decades of reflections, observations, and personal history. I began reading them chronologically in the evenings, feeling like I was having conversations with a younger version of the man I'd loved. The earliest journals confirmed Dorothy's story and revealed much more: the painful rejection by his own father, the struggle to establish himself professionally without family connections, the loneliness of being the family outsider. Family loyalty should never require the sacrifice of one's integrity or dreams, he wrote in an entry from 1972. Perhaps someday my father will understand this, but I cannot wait for that understanding to live my life. As I progressed through the journals, I discovered that Grandpa had indeed reconciled with his father years later, but only after establishing clear boundaries and refusing to compromise on his core values. The parallels to my current situation were uncanny and strangely comforting. I wasn't the first Mitchell to break family patterns, to choose authenticity over appeasement. These discoveries coincided with my beginning therapy with Dr. Janet Wilson, a compassionate but direct psychologist in Burlington. Our weekly sessions helped me process both the recent trauma and the longer patterns of family dynamics that had set the stage for it. "What you're describing are classic narcissistic family roles," she explained during one particularly illuminating session. "Your brother as the golden child, you as the scapegoat. Your grandfather seems to have recognized these patterns and tried to protect you through his inheritance decisions." "But why couldn't my parents see what they were doing?" I asked.
They
"Genuinely believe I'm the villain in this story." That's the nature of entrenched family systems, she replied. When you refuse to play your assigned role, the self-sacrificing daughter, who gives up her interests for the family's agenda, you threaten the entire structure they depend on. Through therapy and Grandpa's journals, I began to understand that my family conflict wasn't simply about a property or money. It was about control, identity, and generations of unhealed patterns. This perspective didn't eliminate the pain, but it helped me carry it with greater understanding. Meanwhile, practical life continued. My new job challenged and fulfilled me in ways my previous position hadn't. Jessica's client base of sustainable businesses and local artisans aligned perfectly with my values, and the smaller studio environment allowed me more creative input and flexibility. In late summer, an unexpected email arrived from Natalie, Marcus' now ex-girlfriend. The subject line reads simply, "You should know the truth, Sarah. Marcus and I broke up last month," she wrote. "His business has completely failed and he's been taking it out on everyone around him. I wanted you to know that your parents were fully aware of his financial problems before your grandfather passed away. The three of them had already discussed using the Vermont property as collateral for a new business loan months ago. They were counting on you to sign it over without question. When you refused, they were already in too deep with promises to investors. I'm sorry for my part in all of this. You deserve better from your family." The email confirmed what I had suspected but provided a timeline. Their plan had been in motion even while Grandpa was still alive, perhaps even while I was caring for him. The calculated nature of their scheme, contrasted with their accusations about my manipulation of Grandpa, was breathtaking in its hypocrisy. I forwarded the email to Rebecca Torres for her records, but decided not to take any further legal action. The restraining order was working. My mother had made no attempts to contact me, and I had no desire to extend the conflict. What Natalie's email provided wasn't ammunition, but closure, the final piece that helped me fully understand what had happened and why. As fall painted the Vermont landscape in brilliant colors, I received word that my Chicago apartment had sold. The practical ties to my former life were now completely severed. I used a portion of the proceeds to establish a college scholarship fund at the local high school in Grandpa's name, feeling he would approve of investing in young people's futures. The vintage car collection became another connection to him, as I learned proper maintenance from Tom, the same mechanic who had helped Grandpa keep them running. The 1967 Mustang became my weekend driver during good weather, and each time I took it out, I felt Grandpa's presence in the perfectly maintained engine he had so lovingly restored. By the time winter arrived, blanketing the property in pristine snow, I had begun to think of myself not as someone who had lost a family, but as someone who was creating a new kind of belonging, one based on genuine connection rather than obligation. I had Grandpa's legacy, both material and spiritual. I had new friends, meaningful work, and a growing sense of purpose. Most importantly, I had finally recognized my own worth, separate from my family's assessment of it. As Grandpa had written in one of his final journal entries, true inheritance isn't property or money, but the courage to live according to one's own truth. This is what I hope I've given Sarah, not just a place to live, but the affirmation that she is enough, exactly as she is. A new chapter unfolds 1 year after my grandfather's passing. The Vermont property had transformed, not into the commercial retreat center my brother had envisioned, but into a true home that honored both Grandpa's legacy and my own sensibilities. The kitchen now gleamed with updated appliances while still featuring the vintage tile backsplash he'd installed with my grandmother decades ago. The living room's original hardwood floors had been refinished to a warm glow beneath area rugs, chosen to complement, not hide, their character. In Grandpa's workshop, now mine, I'd organized his tools exactly as he'd kept them but added my own collection of woodworking books and plans. The skills he taught me had advanced through classes at the local community center and countless hours of practice. I'd completed several small pieces, a jewelry box, a set of coasters, a small side table, each one improving on the last. My professional life had flourished at the Burlington Design Studio. Jessica had promoted me to lead designer after my work with a local sustainable clothing brand earned regional recognition. The balance of creative fulfillment and reasonable work hours left me energy for personal projects and community involvement in a way my Chicago position never had. The antique car collection remained intact in the restored barn, each vehicle maintained to Grandpa's exacting standards. I joined a local classic car club, where members were delighted to share maintenance tips and the occasional Sunday drive through winding country roads. The 1967 Mustang had become my signature vehicle, its engine purring exactly as Grandpa had ensured it would. Perhaps the most meaningful addition to the property was the memory garden I'd planted along the eastern side of the house. Native perennials, Grandpa's favorite flowering shrubs, and a small stone bench created a peaceful spot for reflection. At its center stood a young oak tree, planted on the anniversary of his passing. In my bedroom, a new memory box took pride of place on my dresser, one I'd crafted myself using Grandpa's tools and techniques. It wasn't as perfect as his had been, but the maple and cherry woods complemented each other in a design he would have appreciated. Inside, I'd begun collecting new mementos, photos of the property through seasons, a pressed flower from the memory garden, notes from new friends, small tokens of this rebuilt life. My relationship with extended family remained complicated. Most had chosen sides based on family loyalty rather than facts, maintaining a distance that occasionally still stung but no longer devastated me. My cousin Amy, however, had broken ranks, reaching out with a tentative email that led to regular phone calls and eventually a visit to the Vermont property. I always knew Aunt Diana was difficult, she confessed during that visit, but I never imagined she'd go so far. Through Amy, I received occasional updates about my parents and Marcus. My mother's court-mandated counseling had apparently led to some reluctant self-reflection, though not enough to prompt an apology or amends. My father remained steadfast in his position that I had betrayed the family, his pride preventing any reconciliation overtures. Marcus had moved to Arizona for a fresh start, apparently working for someone else's company rather than launching another doomed venture. I maintained my boundaries with all of them, neither seeking contact nor completely closing the door to possible future healing. Dr. Wilson had helped me understand that reconciliation would require genuine accountability on their part, something that might never come, that I couldn't force it. Family estrangement is sometimes presented as failure, she observed during one of our now monthly sessions, but sometimes it's the healthiest response to toxic dynamics. Your willingness to leave the possibility open while protecting yourself shows tremendous strength. My friendships had deepened and expanded over the year. Frank and Dorothy Johnson remained my surrogate grandparents, including me in holiday gatherings and family celebrations. My Chicago friend Melissa visited regularly, marveling at the peace she saw in me compared to my former stressed existence. Colleagues from the design studio had become weekend hiking companions and dinner guests. The lessons of this difficult journey revealed themselves gradually, often in quiet moments of reflection by the lake or while working with my hands in Grandpa's workshop. I'd learned that family isn't defined solely by blood, but by respect, support, and genuine care. I discovered that standing up for yourself might cost relationships but gain self-respect that no external validation can provide, perhaps most importantly, I'd recognized that the legacy Grandpa truly left me wasn't the property itself, but the example of living authentically despite pressure to conform to others' expectations. His journals revealed a man who had faced similar struggles decades earlier and chosen integrity over appeasement. In honoring his legal wishes, I had also honored the deeper values he lived by. Breaking cycles takes tremendous courage, Dorothy told me one evening as we watched fireflies dance over the lawn. Walter would be proud of how you've handled all this. The memory box my mother destroyed could never be replaced, but I'd come to understand that the most important memories weren't contained in physical objects but lived in the values and lessons I carried forward. By refusing to perpetuate patterns of control and emotional manipulation with future generations, I was creating a more meaningful memorial to Grandpa than any possession could represent. On that anniversary evening, I sat on the dock as sunset painted. The property hummed with early summer life, birds calling their evening songs, fish occasionally breaking the water's surface, a gentle breeze rustling through trees that had witnessed decades of family history. I felt Grandpa's presence, not as grief, but as peaceful continuity. He had given me not just a property, but permission to become fully myself. The price of that becoming had been steep, the loss of my family of origin. At least for now, but the authentic life I was building proved its worth every day. The memory of my mother's destruction no longer held the same power over me. In its place grew something stronger, the knowledge that true inheritance isn't what's given to us, but what we choose to carry forward and what we have the courage to leave behind. Have you ever had to choose between family expectations and your own boundaries? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Standing up for yourself isn't easy, especially when it costs relationships with people you love. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to support more content like this. Remember that sometimes the hardest choices lead to the most authentic life, and you deserve to live authentically, even when others disagree. Thank you for sharing this journey with me, and I wish you courage on your own path forward.